Welcome to the Brim podcast. My name is Philip. I'm the campus pastor at Elevation Matthews, and we had an incredible week this week. We had our second Serve One worship night, and we focused on prayer. It was a powerful time together. I was so blessed by it. We did 21 days of prayer and fasting leading up to this night. And I just wanted to say that I am so grateful to each and every one of you that joined us in that fast, that you extended your faith, trusting that God is going to move in your life. That's what our staff has been praying for. And I am so excited to hear the reports of everything that God has done for you while we chose to fast. Look, we are just so excited about everything that God has been doing and the momentum we have through focusing on the power of prayer. So our team has been working through ways that we can extend an opportunity to you to be in more environments where we get to come together and pray for one another and trust and believe that God is going to move miracles in our lives and that He will bring revival to our communities. So as we're preparing for this night, we got to do an interview with Daytona. She serves as our outreach pastor at Elevation Church, and her story is incredible. What we wanted to do for this podcast is release the full interview of her story. Again, you're only going to get a small piece of everything that she walked through in her life, but my goodness, if somebody has gone through something where they could choose to check out and not serve the Lord, she has this excuse. So if you're in a position like that and you're ready to give up, you need to listen to this entire interview. And she has an absolutely amazing testimony of the power of God in her life, the miracles that God has done in her life, and how He has used her to pray for others and them come to healing and wholeness. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this podcast with Daytona Erkan.
Okay, great. My name is Daytona. I serve as our outreach pastor for our church. I've been at the Matthews campus since 2019, which is crazy. We were at the Uptown campus 5 years before then, and been part of the church since 2014.
Can you go back to the moment where you got saved?
Mm-hmm.
And how was God speaking to you and leading to giving your life to Christ?
So it was in 8th grade at a youth retreat. It was musty, dusty cabin on a lake, and we had some family struggles in that season, and I was really angry. And the youth pastor had said, sometimes being a Christian isn't easy. It wasn't even like a salvation teaching or anything like that. And I just felt like an invitation from the Lord to live for Him versus trying to control things. And so I told the youth pastor afterwards, I was like, hey, I think I gave my life to Jesus. I don't know what that means. And then he was very excited. And now hindsight, I get why he was so excited at the time. I was like, oh, okay. And then when I went home, I told my mom, I said, hey, I think I gave my life to Jesus. And she started crying. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, of course, now hindsight being what it is, I see why she was so excited. But it was just more of just like a gentle invitation to not control things.
And from that point, did you experience spiritual bliss? Or what?
No, bless. No, I don't have the testimony of living like a knucklehead, meeting Jesus, and then living holy and refined.
You mentioned your heart surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Let's kind of like turn a corner and give us a little bit of, these are the events, this is where I was living, this is what was going on leading up to the initial surgery.
Yeah.
And then just walk us through from that point, the places you were going.
Yeah.
Mentally, physically.
Okay. So I'm an Army brat. When we moved a lot, we moved my senior year of high school to Germany, from Leavenworth, Kansas to Darmstadt, Germany, and in 2002. And the German sentiment at the time was very sympathetic post 9/11. I have a heart condition. It's electrical. It's called prolonged QT syndrome. It just means sometimes my heart thinks it should rest when it really shouldn't. And then if it gets startled, it can sometimes go into what's called fibrillation, which just means it beats too fast. And if it does that for too long, it can be fatal. I was not symptomatic until my senior year of high school. So we left the country and I started passing out. So I was the new girl who kept waking up on the floor, which was great. The day I was admitted to the hospital was March 19th, 2003, when President Bush announced the war in Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom. The sentiment towards Americans changed drastically. They set fire to our military gates. We had to take down our flags. They were unable to fly me back to the States for the surgery, partially because the terrorist threat was too high and they said my heart was too unstable. The pediatric military surgeon couldn't see me because he was already deployed in Iraq. And the adult cardiologist, since I was only 17 at the time, and he was over 2 hours away, so it had to be at this one German hospital that, without great irony, was known for its cardiology unit. So we had nurses spit on our floor, tell us we should be ashamed of being an American, used profanities and very degrading names. My mom ended up buying the other bed in the hospital room because we were concerned I was going to get attacked while I was trying to sleep, just because of how apparent it was that we were hated because I was the daughter of a soldier. And so that surgery they ended up doing, and that was the first install for a cardiac defibrillator and pacemaker. So it does both pacing and then if you've ever seen a medical show where they go clear, I have that on the inside. So that was installed. So it's 2 leads, one on the top part of my heart, one on the bottom, and then the battery computer part of it. They did that without anesthesia, and they held me down on the table. So I was like trying to kick and scream. There's one strap that goes over my arm, under my torso, and under the other arm. So I couldn't move my arms. So I was trying to kick and scream, and 2 nurses laid over my legs for that. And that was one of the most betraying moments, I think. Because I believe in like girl code, whereas like even if we don't get along, like you don't let somebody hurt you. And so I felt in that moment that I didn't have an advocate, and that was a very desperate feeling. My prayer before the surgery was for peace because I was nervous. My dad was deployed. This was before smartphones and social media. So to get a message to him that I was having heart surgery went through the Red Cross. And then unfortunately the Red Cross had to send him a message afterwards saying, hey, it didn't go as planned. They tortured her. So they put military police outside of my room for the last 4 days that I was there. I had the opportunity to confront the surgeon before leaving. And I asked him why. And I was like, why not just say no to the surgery? Like, why go through the full install? And as cool as a cucumber, he said, next time kick and scream in German, and got up and left the room. So that was we'd had other traumatic events as a family happen prior to that, but I think that was my closest proximity to somebody that had just chosen evil. And that was difficult. Afterward, was diagnosed with everything you can be diagnosed with after that: PTSD, depression, anxiety. I kept having flashbacks of it, would have night terrors. During the surgery, I prayed that I would die because it was so much pain. I didn't understand it. And I didn't understand why there wasn't anybody to help. And I didn't understand the amount of hate or the amount of pain. It was sublime. So prayed that I would die. And then in recovery, when I finally got pain medicine, I prayed that I would forget. Like the sounds, just being so hated for a characteristic about myself that I didn't choose. So I was like, I didn't want to leave Kansas, right? And I was like, I'm not the one that joined the military. I'm not the one that decided to go to war. I'm not the one that caused 9/11 to happen, and yet I'm the one that's getting tortured. So that was like my 3-part prayer then. I ended up struggling with suicidal thoughts, and that's a very low place to be, where I thought it would just be easier if I could just sleep, and thought the only way out was to choose to end my life. My mom is the reason I did not do that, because my dad was still deployed. My sister had moved back to the States, I think, by that point, and I didn't want her to, and not to be too graphic, I didn't want her to find me. But I had planned it out when and how I was going to do it. But it was like, I just felt it would have been selfish to have her be the person that would have to find me. And so I told her, I was like, I need help. So after I graduated high school, I moved back to Kansas to live with my grandparents. I got addicted to the medications that they had me on, because if I found the sweet, sounds so terrible saying this, the sweet spot of not having, where I could stay awake and function. I was a technology assistant for a school district. So I used to build computers from the ground up. I helped lay technology for a brand new school. But I can't tell you how to do any of that now, because I was on the medication so heavy. So I took enough to stay awake, but not have to feel anything that had happened. Well, that ended up twofold, causing damage to my stomach, and I ended up going to the ER. And then when instant messenger was still a thing, I was IMing my mom on my break, and it was just gibberish. So she had my grandparents come get me, and my grandpa said, "Give me your purse." And I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "You need to face what happened to you." So he flushed everything. So I went through withdrawal that weekend, and that was awful. And I was very mean, and all the physical ramifications that come with withdrawal, because I had become 100% addicted to it because I didn't want to feel or acknowledge what had happened. So after about 3 days of being very mean and very sweaty and very achy and awful, I came downstairs and I apologized to my grandparents. And my grandpa looked up from the paper and said, "I think today's going to be a good day." And my grandma put pancakes on the table, and they never brought it up ever again. So I know you can't earn salvation. They are in very large mansions in heaven right now because of how well they loved me, especially in a season when it was quite difficult to do so. Something I learned through that process, and I saw several counselors over the years. I ended up moving back to Germany because I wanted to leave on my own terms. I took my dad to the hospital when he came back from Iraq in 2004, so he could see. We couldn't go to the OR, obviously, but I showed him the room that I was at for 12 days, and then we moved back to the States. And on the anniversary, so the actual surgery was on March 27th, 2003, and on the anniversary of that, for a very long time, I would get drunk and say really awful things and very hateful things about everything that had happened. I've been asked to speak at different women's events, church things, to share my testimony. Because my mom and I had gotten to the spot where we felt convicted that we needed to be able to pray for the surgeon, not only forgiveness, but to pray for his life to be turned around. Because he said he had a couple of daughters, and we thought about the generational impact he would have ushered in by torturing me the way that he did. I did not want to forgive him. But then having the sober conversation that Jesus was on the cross for him as much as he was for me, and that sin isn't weighted, that it's still a separation. So I ended up speaking at one women's event where afterward a lady came up to me and said, "Oh, I have a goal now to pray for forgiveness." I said, "Do you mind sharing your story?" She was from Laos and had been sold by her dad to a man when she was 12 and ended up escaping, left her son there because she knew her son would be treated better. And so she goes, "I'd like to pray for my dad and to pray for the man who he sold me to." And I was like, okay, next time you should be up here speaking, because that's just sounds like, oh my goodness. But that day, hearing that helped start answering that first prayer I prayed for a little bit of peace. Not that it happened, but that God wouldn't let it be wasted. Little by little, on the anniversary of the surgery, I stopped getting drunk, stopped saying awful things. So it was like my heart, I might not be carrying out a physical manifestation of that evil, but my heart was very hard and was not representing the love of Jesus at all. So I needed to work on confessing that. And different seasons would go to counseling because I discovered healing isn't linear, even though that'd be super convenient. It seems to happen in layers and kind of in a curly Q, which is so frustrating. So several counselors, and then over the years, so I had one replacement in 2009, and then after the surgery, I woke up and the anesthesiologist was there, which felt weird. So what are you doing here? He goes, "How are you feeling?" And I was like, "I feel like I got hit by a truck." And he goes, "I had to give you 3 times the amount of pain anesthesia I would somebody with your body makeup." He goes, "You kept shouting, I can feel it." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't let you know my story." He's like, "No, the nurse told me." And I was like, "I don't remember saying that." He's like, "No, I know. I made sure you wouldn't remember anything." And I was like, "I don't remember feeling anything." He's like, "No, you weren't." And I was like, "I'm so sorry. I go to a deep, dark place with this." And so that one was fine. And then in 2017, when I needed to get that one replaced, they discovered that my leads were, I knew they were inappropriately placed because the original surgeon in Germany was struggling to place them. And then they ended up being on a medical recall. So my electrophysiologist here in Charlotte, who's wonderful and has offered so much healing, he had said that they needed to replace them. And I said, okay. I said, "Well, they're not placed great." And he's like, "How do you know that?" And I was like, "Well, I was awake and I was trying to calm down the surgeon because he was like yelling and cussing at me. And Stephanie's like, what? And I was like, it's a whole thing. Don't worry about it. But it's going to be a mess in there. And so then I woke up from that surgery. It took twice as long as it was supposed to. And he was standing there and he looked so tired and he was slumped over. And he goes, it was such a mess in there. And I was like, I know. And I was like, I was trying to tell you. But it was oddly affirming that physically it was similar to what it had been emotionally. And then he said, to fix what was done, one of your valves is damaged and your heart leaks now. I was like, oh, okay. So what do we do? Just go through my groin? Like, is this like a same day procedure? He's like, no, this would be open heart surgery. And I was like, are we about to do that now? And he's like, no, I don't expect you to have any symptoms. And he's like, you might not ever. And he goes, but if you do, it will probably be like 10 years before you have that. 4 years later, I started having symptoms in 2021. Fatigue, like went to pick up Misha. The time I knew it was bad, I went to pick her up and I had to sit down immediately and put her down because I didn't want to drop her. And I thought, oh man, I thought I had more time. And then when they went in there, they discovered that that my valve had also gotten infected. So afterward, the surgeon said, hey, do you want to see before and after pictures of your heart? And I was like, no, that sounds awful, but I don't have anything else to do while I'm in recovery. Why not? So he shows me the before one. And I was like, well, that doesn't look right. Also, why is it empty? And he's like, oh, well, we had to drain your heart to do the surgery. I was like, oh, well, obviously, blah, blah, blah. I was like, P.S., lie to me. Like, don't tell me things like that. I don't need to know that my heart was drained. But he goes, and I was like, look, I'm as far removed from understanding this picture as possible. I was like, I work at a church. I was a philosophy major, much to my father's dismay. I don't have any clue what any of this means. I don't think it's supposed to look like that. And he was like, oh no, it had gotten infected. This was going to be a cause of death. We did the surgery at just the right time. I said, oh, my sister was in the room and I looked at her. I was like, I need to go back to counseling. This is too much for my brain to acknowledge. I didn't realize how close to death I was. And the day you and I had our meeting, like I drove home that day and I shouldn't have. So, that surgery was successful. It saved my life. It was a miraculous intervention. Unfortunately, I was struggling with the same symptoms that I had before, and they couldn't figure out why, and they bucketed it under chronic life differences post such a massive surgery, since I'm half the age of the average patient that would have had that surgery. So spiritually, during all of this, it was difficult. I love the Lord. I believe in his word. I believe in his healing. I believe in his authority. Before the surgery, I was praying for a miracle that I wouldn't need the surgery, because they were saying, oh, we're going to do this repair because you don't want the replacement. The replacement means you're going to have another surgery again, and nobody wants that. We're going to do the repair. It's going to be great. So when I woke up, Errol was there and he was like, they did the repair and it failed. So they had to do the replacement. So it's not like a gold ring, which who doesn't love gold jewelry, but it was chemically treated pig tissue, which is far less glamorous that's in there. But because it's natural tissue, will decline just like every other type of natural tissue. So spiritually, it was difficult, even in that, because I was still, I still had the breathing tube in, so I couldn't respond verbally to him. I was grateful I woke up on the same day. I was devastated that the repair didn't work. I was angry that it was all preventable. And I just felt forgotten. And I know logically that wasn't the case. I know God is for me. I felt forgotten, and I felt so out of control again, the same way I did when I was on the operating table so many years prior. Being a parent, being somebody that used to run, let me be clear. I jogged and I would finish races. I got finisher medals. I didn't place, but we loved being active, and to go from that to needing to leave after the 11:30 goes in and sleep for several hours was very depressing. So I got diagnosed with PTSD and depression again, which was so defeating and so disheartening. Went to counselors again, somebody that specialized in trauma and PTSD diagnosis, and then, somebody else to help with the long-term ramifications of living with symptoms post-surgery. But one of the lower moments was when Misha said, "It's okay, Mommy, I'll ask Daddy to ride bikes," because she knew I was tired and couldn't function. And to know that type of sentence from my daughter was preventable was just devastating. And it got to the point where I was like, I know I'm not the main character. There's no way I can live this way long term. Like, there's no way I can need to sleep 16 hours after leading a 45-minute teaching session at eGroup Leader Advance. Like, that's how recently, like, I did a breakout session at eGroup Leader Advance, was in bed before 6 p.m. and didn't come downstairs out of bed until almost noon the next day. And I was like, there's no way this is a long life this way. And that's really hard to process. And I was like, okay, God, where are you in this? When I know you're present, but I don't feel your presence, what does that look like? And then, at that point I was already in the outreach role, which just felt absurd to me anyways. I was like, how did I get into an increased sphere of responsibility when I'm walking around tired and sweaty and exhausted all the time? Like, the amount of effort just to get ready. Like, by the time I would get to the office at 8:30 in the morning, I was already exhausted. And so the fact to even be in the outreach role was, I didn't understand it. I was like, this really is absurd. I judge a lot of people for this whole thing coming down to me being in this role, because I'm just like, there's so many other people that could be doing this better and not hunched over and not sound like they smoked a pack before every meeting that they led. And I talked to my sister after the time with my doctor when he had diagnosed me clinically with depression. Again, I called her. She's like, how are you doing? I said, I'm not okay. And I was like, and that feels terrible to say, as I was like, I'm an ordained pastor. I believe in the authority of God's word, and I believe in his miraculous intervention. And I've given up hope that I'll be healed. And I was like, so I feel like an imposter. And I was like, and I don't know how to process feeling like there's no way this can be a long life when I'm just this tired. Yeah, so that was hard. It was also very liberating to say that sentence out loud and to a safe space like my sister. She loves the Lord too, and she has a wonderfully grounded approach to things. She's very logical. And she's like, that's a very fair way to feel. And then that's when, like a week later, the very next week is when I went to the Dominican.
So.
Yeah. What are we talking about?
You were a knucklehead.
Oh, yeah, I'm a knucklehead. Yeah, that's pretty much how to sum it up. So when I reflect back from that retreat, I acknowledged Jesus as Savior, but did not start living for him as Lord until much later on. And so I was making decisions almost with being a Christian as a fallback versus honoring him with like a reverential fear and honor. I didn't start learning that, or I didn't start acknowledging or making life choices based off that until much later.
When you started to grow in your faith and get to that place what you're describing as like the deepening of your faith and maturity, what led to that? What helped you grow?
Being in a really awful season personally. I was reaping sowing decisions that weren't honoring God, and had hit a moment where I was in a very low place and was sitting on my lunch break. I was living in New York City at the time, and I was sitting on the red steps right there in Times Square. And I realized that I couldn't blame anybody but myself for the position that I was in. Like, I was making a slice of pizza and Gatorade last for 2 meals because through a series of decisions had $8 to my name, and living in New York City, that's tremendously difficult to do. And I was too prideful to ask for help. So like lost weight. My friends were like, oh, you look good. I was like, I'm really hungry. I'm not eating regularly. But I was sitting there and I was like, man, I'm not even mad at all that went into this season. I realized that I had lived as Jesus as my Savior, not as Jesus as Lord too. And so on that lunch break, I asked, it made me think of, was it Samson that was in the Philistine temple and asked God to look on him one more time? And And I was like, I have nothing to offer you. Like literally, like I can't even tithe online for the church I was going to at the time because it would have been 80 cents. And so I was like, I have absolutely nothing to offer, but can you look on me one more time? And I had, my great aunt was a tremendous counselor in that season. And I let her know that was my prayer. And she goes, God was faithful in that season for Samson, but Jesus looks on you always and not out of obligation or disappointment. And so confess what you need to confess, dust yourself off. God's not finished. And so when I look back on that day versus what we get to be a part of now, I'm just overwhelmed with God's faithfulness. But it was a season of like a very low time in my life that led to that acknowledgement.
Moving forward, when did you sense a call to work in ministry to serve God?
There's, not to give a very cliche answer, there's always been something tugging me to it, even before having an active relationship with Jesus. There was this I knew God was, and had different people in church experiences speak that over me or acknowledge that. I had disqualified myself from coming on staff in ministry, vocational ministry, just because of what I like to say is a robust testimony. I didn't think I would ever be able to come on staff at a church. And so I was very honest and transparent in the interview process here. And just like, hey, this is my testimony and I can't change any of it. God's redeemed all of it. And so it's just been, God's been very kind in being able to use those moments that I was otherwise embarrassed and ashamed of to create connection with other people that are navigating the same struggles.
So talk through going to the Dominican, what you experienced there, and the healing.
We had the opportunity, we were invited by Samaritan's Purse to go see the distribution of OCC boxes down there in the Dominican Republic. I wanted to go to, this sounds like a terrible posture. I wanted to inspect what the process looked like. They're an organization that I respect and look up to. I wanted to make sure that the integrity I assumed they had was carried out. I didn't want it to seem like a Santa Claus experience, but they do a remarkable job empowering the local church. And the message is Jesus the whole way through. So it's wonderful. But going there, the first full day in country, I was falling asleep sitting up. And at the second church we were at, so I was embarrassed. I felt like I wasn't representing our church well. We were in the back row, so I don't know if anybody actually noticed, but I was really, really angry at myself for even going. I was like, this was not a wise yes. Now I'm in a country where I can't drink the tap water, even to brush my teeth. And I was like, I don't want to end up in a hospital. I'm like, I've seen how it's happened in first world countries. I'm like, I'm in a country where this is going to be a problem if I end up in a hospital, and it will be a distraction for the group on the trip. So I was very angry and just so deflated, and felt so weak. So my prayer the next day, that morning, was like, God, don't let me be a distraction to what's happening, because to see the name of Jesus and the gospel be presented so simply and so beautifully and so confidently, and to see little hands go up to embrace Jesus Christ was amazing. And I was like, I don't want to get in the way. And I don't want to be a distraction, and I want to end up at a hospital where I can't drink the tap water. And I was like, there's just no way this lands well. So the church we were at was just a garage that in a very poverty-stricken neighborhood, and like wasn't even allowed to cross the street alone. Like we always had to be with people just because of where we were at. And I ended up cutting my finger. I was one of the box cutters to prep them for the kids. And I was like, there was no running water at the church. I almost died of getting an infection in my heart. So I was like, when I looked down, and I'm on a blood thinner, so there's blood everywhere. I was like, oh no, I can't even wash my hands, and I can't get an infection. This is arguably worst case scenario. And I don't want to like scare the kids, because it's like a crime scene coming out of my finger. So I hid my finger under my shirt, passing boxes out. It was like, they didn't notice, thank God. And after, as we were going to leave, we were hugging some of the volunteers, and I was the last person in line. And the last woman I hugged, I had not interacted with her beforehand. She didn't know what I walked in with. And she latched onto me and just started praying in Spanish and in tongues. And it was the first time in a long time that I felt somebody's faith. And I was immediately convicted because I thought, how often when I pray, do people feel my faith, or is the optic that I'm just going through the motions? And then, have you ever asked your kids 4,000 times to do something, and that 4,000th time the request is really a dejected, like, can you just put your just put your shoes on? I feel like that's how I was praying to God at that point, because I had prayed for healing thousands of times, and I had no idea what she was praying. I was like, she doesn't know my story, she doesn't know my name, but she believes in whatever she's asking God for. And so I was like, God, can you just say yes? Like, it was such a dejected, disheartened prayer. And I was like, and can I borrow some of her faith? Because she believes everything she's praying to you right now. I can feel it. And I've just given up so much hope. And so then she kept praying, and, we cleaned up, we left. And later that day at lunch, my teammate John came over and he's like, hey, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad I got to rest on the bus a little bit. I did not recognize in that moment until dinner. I had not responded with the word good and how people asked how I was doing in over 2.5 years. I would always flip it. I'm like, oh, I'm doing all right. How are you doing? Or I'm doing okay. Good to see you. And would just pivot because I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to be like, I feel like crap and I want to go to sleep and I'm tired and I'm depressed. It was like, you don't want to be that girl. So I would just flip it. But I didn't notice it then at lunch. And then we went to another church. And then later on at dinner, he asked me again, he's like, hey, how are you doing? I said, whoa, I feel good. And I was like, why? Well, I haven't answered good in a really long time. He's like, I think you got healed in that prayer. So in my ordained pastoral response, I was like, no, certainly that couldn't be it. It must be because we're not lifting heavy things. Just rationalized it down, just totally discounted it. And I've apologized to Jesus several times since then for that response. So the next day, and I even called Errol that night, and he's like, hey, you sound good. And I was like, yeah, I'm not as tired as I was expecting. And then discounted it and switched the topic. And then the next day we were up at 4 a.m., had 2 flights back to Charlotte. My voice, I didn't sound like a smoker. And I felt good. And I have felt amazing since then. I have felt tired if I stay up late, but I don't feel depleted. My voice is, even when I get tired, I don't sound like I burned a pack. Or I pick up Misha. We went to a kite festival and I ran around with a butterfly kite. And I stopped only because I lost interest, not because I was tired. But I was like, oh, there's not much to do with a kite here. But to be able to play with my daughter and to be able to function at work with a level of excitement and gratitude. And it's absolutely restored and renewed my hope. I got a miracle physically. I think almost probably not that anything's hard for God, but he's a gentleman. Probably the harder miracle was to heal my mindset on the situation versus, and he could heal, anyway, he rose Lazarus, he conquered the grave. But I think to heal my mindset on the matter was probably the bigger miracle in all of it.
And that seemed to unlock a shift in your perspective towards faith,
yeah,
healing.
A lot.
Give a description of that shift and then what you personally have experienced.
Can I be honest with you?
Please do.
I didn't like that it took me going out of country to receive a miracle. And I was like, why don't we see miracles here more often? And I asked God on the way to work one day, I asked him, God, why don't we see miracles more often? And I thought of Peter, where it said God's healing could come through his shadow. And I was like, well, Peter has a past and God healed through him. So I was like, God, would you remove anything from me that would prevent your healing from going through me? In the amount of opportunities that have come up where he's absolutely moved, somebody who struggled with a cough their whole life, an asthmatic, incessant cough, she doesn't cough anymore. Somebody who is expecting to have to go through chemo because more cancer was found, doesn't have to go through chemo at all. It's hormone shots twice a year. Somebody that was just diagnosed on Thursday that I sent you a message about, that was diagnosed with an aggressive form of melanoma. they think they can get it all in surgery and she won't need chemo and that she's going to be okay. And so now it's I pray that prayer every day now is like, God, anything in me that's blocking somebody's view of you or blocking you from moving through me, get rid of it. So practically that's looked like I've deleted my social media accounts or going through our house. Like where's their clutter mentally, physically, emotionally? So I'm like, there are people suffering and God has equipped us to be able to, through his power, to be able to come alongside people, not only carry their burdens, but declare his healing over the situation. And I know circumstantially that will look different for everybody, but I just want more of God's glory. And now it's more of a, let's pray about it because I know God is bigger than whatever it is, right? Like I was told there was nothing they can do. Like had doctors in a very pristine office say, we don't know how to help you. And I'm upright and I could run around with a kite with my daughter, right? There was somebody that was disheartened and said, I'm disheartened because I'm going to have to start chemo. They found more cancer. And then sent our team a text saying, my cancer's in remission. They're going to do hormone shots every 6 months, but I don't have cancer anymore. It was just like, that's easy for God. So it's just like, I want to get anything in me that would block that out, and just changed, I think, my priority in life versus preference to purpose.
What's one of the most like surprising moments in the way that God has used you that you're like, oh, I'm so grateful. I never expected I would have the ability to do this.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I would think the first one that comes to mind is baptizing Misha last year, especially when you broke us to tears talking about how when one of our first meetings when you became the campus pastor, it was my last day working before my massive heart surgery, and I was like slumped over and slurring. It was awful, but saying I can't even pick my daughter up and then being able to be able to baptize her as a pastor was just overwhelming.
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment. If you were to say this statement, if you're here tonight and you've lost your hope.
Say, if you're here tonight and you've lost your hope, 1, that's okay. 2, confess it, right? It loses so much power to confess it in a safe place. And this is absolutely a safe place to do that. And I think once that comes out, invite God into that space to backfill. And because he's faithful, he's going to move through that. But I would say confession is so powerful. And I think we'll view confession as only saying what you've done wrong or things like that. And so it's confessing where you are. I don't think God can bless the spiritual map dot we pretend to be in versus the authentic place that we're in. So if you've lost hope and pretend that you have it, God can't bless your hopelessness and meet you there and change your hopelessness if you're pretending that you have it. So I would say confess where you are honestly in a safe place like this, in a room where people are going to rally around you, help carry your burdens, and point you back towards Jesus.
There's one last or final thing that you'd like to share with us, anything that you didn't get a chance to say?
I just want to keep praying with people now at this point. I'm excited. I love the Matthews campus so much because I feel like there's a posture switch where we're expecting God to move and we're seeing God move more frequently. So I'm in a very excited season because of our campus community. Because I think there's this posture of the serve one that has brought us into this radical and glorious alignment. So I'm excited. I know God's going to keep moving. He didn't bring us this far to only bring us this far.
Would you just pray over our campus?
Oh, yeah, sure. Eyes open, or that feels... Dear Jesus.
That was funny.
Jesus, thank you for what you're doing in, for, and through the Matthews campus. We count what we do as sacred. Every person here, is sacred. So we consecrate all of it to you. Lord, anything in us that's blocking our community from seeing you, I ask that you take it out. Anything that needs to be confessed, Lord, thank you for being a God that says shame off of you, not shame on you. So for anybody here that needs to be reminded that you call them son or daughter, and that you're proud of them, that you look on them willingly and lovingly, not out of obligation or disappointment, but because you're proud of them, independent of what they can produce or accomplish, but because their identity is in you. Oh Lord, let them feel the freedom to set things down that isn't theirs to carry. We trust you with this next season because you're trustworthy. We praise you tonight because you're praiseworthy. And we know you're going to move immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine because of your power at work within us. Let us walk and live in a way that honors the authority and humility that comes with that. Jesus, it's in your name and for your glory. Amen. Great. Thanks, man.
Thanks again for joining us for the Brim podcast. I hope you enjoyed Daytona's story. What we would love to do is hear how God has been moving in your life. So make sure to leave us a comment, shoot us an email, let us know how that we can continue to minister to you and how God is using this podcast to move you forward in your life. Make sure that you like and subscribe so that you get all of the content. We've got a lot of stuff coming up in the future. We're going to go through a little bit of a rebrand here in a little bit. So make sure that you stay tuned. I'm excited for what God is going to do through you at our campus and all that he's going to do in our communities. Love y'all.